Hey guys, welcome back. So today I just want to give a slightly different perspective on Micron, and this perspective and this update is very deliberate because every single day I just want to highlight that it doesn't need to be the same take. So yesterday, for example, I was very bullish on Micron stock, but that doesn't mean necessarily that I come back the next day today and force the same exact tone and sentiment if I feel as though something fundamentally has changed. In particular, in this case, the market backdrop has changed, and right now, that's what I think is happening. Now, just to be clear from the start, I am still bullish on Micron on a fundamental level. That hasn't changed. The core story to me is still strong, and I've already shown before that contract pricing in particular, which is a very big deal here, it reflects the vast majority of the memory market, and that's still expected to move up. So from a pure Micron perspective, I still think there is upside, but I also need to just keep the forest for the trees in mind, because right now the overbearing factor in markets is the geopolitical risk. And when that becomes the dominant thing which is driving the sentiment, it can actually weigh on everything. Not just the weak names, but also the strong names too, that of Micron, for example. Um, because if this Iran situation keeps escalating as it looks like it's going to continue to do so as well, and then subsequently the oil prices stay elevated and they move even higher, and by high I mean like a price target of potentially $150 per barrel, then that creates a massive macro problem, because structurally what higher oil prices means is it's usually inversely correlated to economic growth, and that can then subsequently lead to inflation. And if inflation starts becoming more of a problem again, as it did a few years ago, then the market starts to think about rates, and maybe the Fed will come in and increase rates and keep rates a little bit high. And if there's a risk of rate hikes happening all over again, then guess what happens? It's going to impact risk on assets, and those risk on assets are your tech stocks. Broadly speaking, they're treated as the risk on part of the market, which means Micron subsequently will get hit as well. So even if Micron's own story is looking very attractive from a fundamental and from a business execution perspective, it doesn't mean that the stock is going to ignore what's actually happening around it. And that's the point I want to make today, and that is that the Micron play is just not simple here, because yes, you do have very bullish um, things happening around the company, right? But we also need to acknowledge that the wider market may also be heading into a rougher patch for the next quarter or so. In my view, we might not see a bottoming of prices across the board for the entire stock market until the end of Q2 to beginning of Q3 or so, but that's just my guess at this point in time. And I think this is where I think people just need to be careful, because if the market is crumbling on the back of an energy shock, then on the back of that you are going to get inflation fears and fears around rates and concerns around rates as well, right? And that's just something that we need to respect. Um, we just cannot say and just sit here and be like, for Micron, none of that matters. It does matter, and this is how people actually get caught, right? Because they just become too focused on the individual stock story, and they just stop looking at the whole picture, which is why I'm saying the wider picture, seeing the wood from the trees, is what matters here. So I've also said as well before that one risk in this AI cycle is that if the rates move up hard enough that you can start getting comparisons to the .com period, right? Not because the businesses here are identical. I wouldn't. They're not. I think there's real application for AI in the AI story versus the .com stocks, where you had pets.com having multi-billion-dollar valuations just for a domain. I think it's what will happen if the Fed does hike up rates is just like the dot-com era, hiking up the rates. I think it was about 150 to, I think it was about 180 basis points that it only rose by before the bubble, the dot-com era actually popped, right? So I think relating that to today's world, if the inflation were to reaccelerate because of an energy shock, then that can lead to much tighter conditions, and that can absolutely see a change in sentiment across AI names, and we can see those stocks starting to crack. And if that happens, then even big reputable names like Micron, is not going to trade in isolation to any of that. So yeah, that's it. Sorry to lay it out thick like that. It's a bit of a downer compared to my other updates that I've given in the past, but I felt I felt obligated to giving such an update and just kind of put it out there very cleanly as around what my sentiment was around this. So yeah, but then saying that, we don't know yet what's going to happen, right? Because there is another side to this too, right? It's if the economy weakens and if the job market drops and the demand softens enough, then to protect the job market, then maybe the Federal Reserve doesn't aggressively go down that path, and that's the reason why we just need to take this step by step, guys. Right? Let's not be stubborn. Let's not be emotional about this. Let's just take the step by step, which is the reason why I'm giving daily updates like this. And if you do like getting fresh, balanced perspectives, then please do subscribe. I'm a new channel, and that would just go a long way, and I'd really appreciate that. But I think going back again, I think the big thing for me is just to watch is the contract pricing for DRAM chips, because I think that's one of the clear signals whether the Micron thesis is still holding up despite all of this noise. So I'm not abandoning the bull case by any means. I still think Micron fundamentally has a very strong story, but I'm also not going to ignore the fact that the markets right now look quite vulnerable, and I think that's the geopolitical risk which I wanted to kind of express. I think that's the overbearing factor at this point in time, and that's my view as of today. So yeah, so just to summarize again, I'm still bullish on Micron on a fundamental level, but I'm also respectful of the wider market backdrop as well, because in this kind of environment, you have to keep the bigger picture in mind. And right now, the big picture is getting a lot more fragile, right? So that's it. Again, I'm Amit, the TikTok investor. Let me know what you think in the comments, and I'll catch you in the next one. Okay, thank you.